Hello, I'm the Pageant Nerd, and thanks for checking out this video covering the drought-breaking queens at Miss Universe. I've covered at length the all-time and active placement streaks at Miss Universe. It's such a popular topic that I produced a revised series after Miss Universe 2021. And while nations are justifiably proud when they post consistently strong results year on year, the celebrations are arguably just as jubilant when a drought of some sort is broken. That could be a drought or long period between placements or even crowns. Countries with weaker sashes don't have the luxury of high expectations and high visibility. Quite often, excellent delegates are overlooked when they might not be if they represented a nation with a stronger sash. When those countries break through and make the semifinals or better, it's truly a great thing to witness. So, in honour of these record-setting, drought-breaking queens, here's a look at the women who've made their countries proud with success, separated by decades. Before we dive in, if you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing to my channel, ringing the bell for alerts, giving this video a thumbs up, and/or hitting the super thanks button. Alright, let's get started. First of all, I'll be counting down the longest placement gaps at Miss Universe, starting with the 12th longest and finishing with number 1. After its 1959 placement, the Cold War meant Poland was absent from Miss Universe for a quarter century until 1984. Not only placing 2 years later in Panama, but finishing in the top 5. While Paraguay finished first runner-up at Miss Universe 2021, its first 2 placements were separated by 27 years. Their third and fourth were separated by just 2 years. Third runner-up finishes in 2004 and 2006. Between 1954 and 1979, Argentina placed a total of 13 times, including its 1962 crown. But its next placement wouldn't come until 2006, with only another 2 since then. Guatemala has just 3 placements at Miss Universe, its first 2 separated by 29 years, with the Drought-Breaker in 1984 going on to win Miss International that year. Placement number 3 came 26 years later. Iceland was first runner-up to Argentina in 1962, but its next placements wouldn't be until 1980 and then 2009, the latter being a 29-year wait. 10 more years later, Iceland made the top 10 for the first time since that first runner-up result. Nicaragua has placed 3 times since the turn of the millennium, but the gap between its first and second placements was 3 full decades. While they've never won Miss Universe, British women were regular semi-finalists in the 60s, 70s and 80s, competing separately as England, Scotland and Wales. But that ended abruptly after 1983, and a full 30 years passed until Amy Willerton, representing the combined Great Britain, made the top 10 in Moscow. Singapore landed in the semis twice in the 1980s, in St. Louis in 1983 and on home soil in 1987. But its 34-year drought was finally broken at Miss Universe 2021 in Israel, courtesy of Nandita Bana. Denmark placed 6 times between 1953 and 67, but nearly 4 decades passed without another. Then out of the blue were consecutive semi-final finishes in 2006 and 7. Haiti has only competed consistently at Miss Universe since 2010, but placed on debut in 1962 and finished first runner-up in 1975. Its next placement, and just 3rd overall, was another first runner-up, Raquel Pellissier, in 2016. Costa Rica appeared at 67 of the first 70 Miss Universe pageants, with 4 of its 6 placements occurring since 2011. But the first 2 were separated by exactly half a century, in 1954 and 2004. And the longest gap between placements almost spans the entire life of the Miss Universe pageant itself. Sri Lanka was known as Ceylon when it placed second runner-up in the 4th edition in 1955. 62 years would pass before its only other placement, a top 16, in 2017. Will we see this record broken anytime soon? More on that a little later in this video. Equally or even more momentous are epic waits between victories. For some countries, it's the reward for patience after coming ever so close. Others are returned to form after years out of contention. Either way, these drought-breakers all deserve our adulation. Lupita Jones was Mexico's first Miss Universe in 1991, and 19 years later the national director for its second. By 2010, Lupita had been sending Mexico's bets to Miss Universe for 16 years, her own personal drought broken as well as her country's. Janelle Commision's crown in 1977 was also Trinidad and Tobago's first ever placement at Miss Universe. Wendy Fitzwilliam's equally popular win came 21 years later. The country makes a welcome return to Miss Universe in 2022 after a 5-year absence. When Lara Dutta won India's second Miss Universe in 2000, 6 years after its first, Harnaz Sandhu was just 70 days old. She would go on to win the 70th Miss Universe pageant in Israel, breaking India's 21-year winless streak. Finland's Armi Kusala took the inaugural Miss Universe crown in 1952, and despite another 7 top 3 placements in the subsequent years, it was a full 23 years before Anne-Marie Potamo won her country's second crown in 1975. Finland's fortunes have changed dramatically in recent decades. More on that later. Thailand is one of 3 countries with 2 crowns separated by 23 years, while Porntip Nakirankanok's 1988 victory was also the first by an Asian woman in 15 years. Thailand is a 3-time host of Miss Universe, despite what Miss Universe itself seems to think, with more hosting duties coming soon. Link in the corner for more on that. Canada, along with France, are the only 2 nations to have competed in every edition of Miss Universe through 2021. Both countries have 2 crowns, though Canada's victory gap pales in comparison to that of France's. More on that shortly. 4 consecutive top 3s, including its first crown in 1972, meant Australia was a Miss Universe powerhouse in the 60s and 70s, but not a single placement in the 80s. A brief resurgence with consecutive placements in the early 90s was followed by the long-awaited victory of Jennifer Hawkins in 2004. South Africa's 39-year gap between its first and second crowns also included a 10-year ban from Miss Universe over its former apartheid policy. With a strong national pageant system currently in place, South Africa's wait for its third crown was just 2 years. Collecting its first 2 crowns in 1969 and 73, the Philippines endured more than 4 decades of waiting, plus the most controversial crowning moment in Miss Universe history, before it secured title number 3, Pia Wurtzbach's Christmas gift in 2015. After Akiko Kojima became the first Asian Miss Universe in 1959, Japan placed on and off until 1975, but only once more in the next 2 decades. Frenchwoman Inès Ligron took over Japan's national directorship in 1997, and over the next dozen years produced 2 runners-up and its second winner, Rio Mori, 48 years after Kojima. Colombia's first Miss Universe, Luz Marina Zuluaga, was aged 76 when her countrywoman Paulina Vega won the 2014 crown. Luz Marina got to meet Colombia's second Miss Universe, but passed away 18 days before she passed on her title. It's only fitting that the longest gap between 2 Miss Universe crowns belongs to one of only 2 countries that competed in the pageant's first 70 editions. Interestingly, with its 1953 and 2016 queens, Christiane Martel and Iris Mittener respectively, France has never had a runner-up at Miss Universe. It's had just one other top 5 placement, Flora Cocorel in 2015, one of the years the field was reduced from a top 5 to a top 3. There are obviously other drought-breakers, such as those that ended weights between other types of placements, such as top 10 or top 5. Here are a bunch of such achievements, but it's far from an exhaustive list. Let's move on now to those nations with ongoing weights for placement glory, either for their next one or even their first. Of the nations announced to compete at Miss Universe 2022, Honduras is the country with the longest placement drought, a massive 67 years since its only semi-final result in 1955. Rebecca Rodriguez, Honduras's 51st Miss Universe representative, aims to become the pageant's biggest drought breaker of all time, a placement that would surpass Sri Lanka's current record 62-year gap. Malaysia, which could have reasonably expected to place in 2011 with the spectacular Deborah Henry, continues to go unplaced since its first and so far only semi-final in 1970. Lebanon, Belize and Uruguay are next on the list of longest active placement droughts. Interesting to see Finland also high, given its former glories, proving fortunes indeed rise and fall. Same goes for Germany, which placed in the first 10 Miss Universe pageants from 1952 to 61, but hasn't made the semis since 2002. Here are the other placement droughts of 10 years or longer. As I covered in my last video, 69 nations or territories have competed in but are yet to place in the 7-decade history of Miss Universe. Of those 69, 15 were confirmed to compete at Miss Universe 2022 when this video was made. Ranked in terms of appearances, Malta has been waiting the longest of all 15, with the next edition being its 41st attempt. A placement by Maxine Formosa would end a 54-year wait since Malta's first appearance in 1968. The British Virgin Islands, Mauritius and Cayman Islands have all made 30-plus attempts without a placement and all return in 2022. Here are the rest of the nations gunning for a first-ever placement, including the Seychelles, returning to Miss Universe for the first time since its 1995 debut, and Bhutan, which debuts at Miss Universe 2022, hard to place without a prior history. Sash factor hasn't been kind to many of these nations covered here, either lately or ever. Placement or any form of success is arguably easier for some countries than others, influenced by previously strong results, the popularity of pageants in a given country, and other factors. Is this fair? Arguably not, but it's a fact of life for all international pageants. We shall see if recent ownership changes at some of the biggest competitions makes any difference, for better or worse. That concludes my video on Miss Universe's drought-breaking queens. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'll be back soon with my next video, but in the meantime, it's farewell from me, the Pageant Nerd.